Hi, folks. Welcome back. Here we are on recorded lecture 6. In our last recorded lecture, we talked about Jean-Jacques Rousseau and how his idea of general will is quite confusing, but essentially how he believes that general will is ideal. And if we can attain it, then the government's going to be great, and we're going to be great because the government will never err and will always benefit society as a whole. I left you some questions on whether the general will is actually attainable and identifiable. And today we're going to be talking about John Rawls, another John, this one's American. Okay, so with that said, let's go ahead and get into it because we do have a good amount. So who was he? I have him right there. He's an American moral and political philosopher. He lived there in the 1900s, and he passed away about 20 years ago now. And he was a Harvard professor. I think before that he was in Cornell, but I'm not sure. He wrote his very famous book, A Theory of Justice, in 1971, at a time when articles like Is Political Philosophy Dead were sort of coming up. So notice here we're doing a bit of a time jump, right? We went from the 1600s to the 1700s with Rousseau, and now we're jumping forward a few, like 3 centuries, 300 years. Basically, after Rousseau, people kept talking about political philosophy and social contract theory for a while, but eventually, once the 1800s and 1900s hit, most people didn't really care about political philosophy. So he was actually pretty well credited, and I think correctly, in making Western philosophy care about political philosophy again. The main question in his work and in his life, I think, is what is justice? His answer that justice is fairness. As we're going to see, we're going to have to figure out what exactly he means by fairness, because fairness sounds nice, right? But what does that even mean? Defining justice with fairness, well, justice is a vague term, and fairness can also be a vague term. So we're going to get to the idea of fairness in a few slides. Again, he was inspired by Hobbes or so, and he was still very much interested in social contract theory. And however, in his view, he's going to kind of switch it up a little bit, right? For him, he doesn't really have a state of nature. Remember Hobbes, the state of nature is nasty, brutish, and short, and it exists when there's no government. For him, he has something similar called the original position. In the original position, as we're going to see, people are sort of taken out, hypothetically, from society, and they have to decide on the principles of justice. This is what he calls them, principles of justice, to then run society. Again, the social contract for him is just a matter of agreeing on principles of justice. It's not so much on figuring out whether the government is legitimate and what limitations should be on the government. He's concerned more with something more fundamental, namely what is the best principle or idea of justice, and how do we identify it? What is the best version or notion of justice, and what does it tell us about society? That's what he's concerned about. Less about the government itself and how powerful or not powerful they should be, but more about how society should be structured. And namely, he says that it should be structured via justice, but what is the best notion of justice? As we're going to see later on, he's going to say that the best notion of justice is something called justice as fairness, but important for now to notice is that justice is going to be identified by being, or the best form of justice is going to be identified as by being the most rational version of justice. So that's what he says. The best version of justice is the most rational version of justice. And as we're going to see, the most rational version of justice is going to be justice as fairness, and we'll get to that in a slide or two. So here's the cover of his book. You don't have to read it all for this course. You definitely can if you want to, though, if you're interested in his work. In that book, he starts off by saying, the question to answer is, being first virtues of human activities, truth and justice are uncompromising. That's a fancy way of saying truth and justice are very important for society. To this end, it is necessary to work out a theory of justice, figure out what justice is, in light of which of these assertions can be interpreted and assessed. Just trying to say, we're trying to figure out the best version of justice, the best conception of justice, and what does that tell us? What does that tell us once we have figured out the best conception of justice? Do note that he is against utilitarianism. Utilitarianism, we're not going to study that in this course, but utilitarianism is basically the idea that the ends justify the means. So, for instance, people sometimes talk about, would you kill baby Hitler if you could save millions of lives? Would you murder baby Hitler if you could save millions of lives? A utilitarian would say, yes, the ends justify the means. The consequences justify the means. He does not like utilitarianism or consequentialism, and he makes it very obvious early on. He says each person possesses an inviolability founded on justice that even the welfare of society as a whole cannot override. He says basically, each person has rights, and even if we could violate your rights in order to benefit society as a whole, we cannot. We cannot. That is immoral to do. So utilitarianism, crumple that up and throw it away. Don't like that. So here are some assumptions and limitations, right? And he mentions this very early on in his work. He is only concerned with what we in philosophy call ideal theory. What is ideal theory according to him? Well, it's only focused on well-ordered societies. He's only concerned on figuring out the best conception of justice in a well-ordered society. A well-ordered society is, one, a society in which everyone accepts and knows that the other people accept the same principles of justice, the same ones. And two, the basic social institutions generally satisfy and are generally known to satisfy these principles. So whatever your principles of justice, whatever your conception of justice is, in a well-ordered society, everyone knows them, everyone abides by them, and so do the institutions such as the government. A good question to ask right here from the beginning is, are we here in the United States a well-ordered society? Does everyone know and abide by the same principles of justice? And do our political institutions and social institutions abide by them as well? I'll leave that for you. So he's not concerned with international law, discussions of injustice, or non-ideal theory. Non-ideal theory just deals with societies that are not well ordered, Non-ideal theory concerns societies where people don't agree on the principles of justice, and the institutions, the political and social institutions, do not follow these principles of justice most, a lot, or ever of the time. Why is he only considering ideal theory? Why doesn't he consider injustice? And he tells us, the reason for beginning with ideal theory is that it provides, he believes, the only basis for the systematic grasp of these more pressing problems. What are the more pressing problems? International tension, war, crimes against humanity, things such as that, political unrest. These are more pressing problems, but he thinks that we figure out what to do in a perfect society, in an ideal society, that'll help our imperfect societies become perfect by copying them. As we're going to see with Charles Mills in a few weeks, he's going to think that strategy is horrible. He does not like that strategy at all, Charles Mills, and he's going to start with non-ideal theory. But I'm running a little ahead of myself. The idea is here is that John Rawls starts with ideal theory. He's only concerned with ideal theory. With that said, let's move on to section 3. Let's get into the bulk of his argument, right? He thinks free and rational persons are going to be the basis for figuring out what justice as fairness is. So free and rational people are going to be the people to decide what justice is and what fairness is. Now, that's already pretty vague, and he doesn't tell us very much what a rational person entails. So take that however you want. But he tells us this. He gives us another hypothetical. And this should not be surprising, right? A lot of these political philosophers like these imaginary hypothetical situations. They think they tell us something about our current real society. Whether you disagree or not, that's up to you. But this is a very popular move in political philosophy. He says, look, the original position, he calls it, is a state of nature, but it's not historically real. And people are, in a sense, taken out of society, and then they are asked to come up with principles of justice. So it's kind of weird, right? Suppose you're in society, we're all in society, suddenly we're all raptured and taken up to the skies in a cloud, and then everyone there that is a free and rational person, hopefully all of us, have to come up with principles of justice that our society will then run on once we are put down back into society. However, there's a problem. Free and rational people will rationally choose what benefits them. So, for example, if you are rich, you will favor tax breaks. If you are racist, you will favor racist policies. If you're poor, you might favor more welfare positions. That is a rational thing to do given your interest in your ideologies, right? The problem here is that once everyone's up in the sky, no one's going to be able to agree on anything because they're all going to want to have their own private pursuits. So how does he fix this? He fixes this in a really, I think, pretty smart way, through a veil of ignorance. The veil of ignorance is this, that once you are in the original position, once you are up in the sky, you don't know at all how you're going to end up once you come back down to society. You will, in a sense, be given a new identity. So I have like a little diagram here, right? On the left, we have the original position, and in the middle, we have the veil of ignorance. Because of the veil of ignorance, when you come back into society, you're not going to know anything about what position you have in that society. You're going to be a completely different person, potentially. He says, among the essential features of this situation is that no one knows his place in society, his class position, or social status, nor does anyone know his fortune in the distribution of natural assets and abilities, his intelligence, strengths, and the like. The parties do not even know their psychological propensities, meaning whether you like to chill and stay at home or whether you're more extroverted. In a sense, when you're up there in the original position, the principles of justice are chosen behind a veil of ignorance. Why does he do this? Well, now the rich person who will favor tax breaks and the poor person, which will favor welfare programs, they are no longer going to be biased because they don't know what position they're going to have once they're down here at all. I don't know. I think it's a pretty good solution. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on whether the veil of ignorance succeeds in your opinion. But he believes that if everyone is in the original position and you put the veil of ignorance over their eyes, free and rational people will choose two principles for society, two principles of justice. The first principle is the equality of opportunity principle, which says that which says that the first principle requires equality in the assignment of basic rights and duties. Any other benefits, such as offices, like political positions, must be open to all. And I really want you to sort of think whether that's satisfactory or not. He says that opportunities must be open to everyone. But does that really mean that everyone can sort of attain each and every opportunity? Think of, for instance, how much money it's involved in running for president. We all technically, after a certain age, have the opportunity to run for president if we are a citizen. But does that mean that you and your middle-class lifestyle can fund it and get as good of a chance as someone else who might be a millionaire, for instance? You have the opportunity. Does that satisfy you? Here's the second one. This is the more interesting one. Again, they're going to come up with two principles. The second one says that the second holds that social and economic inequalities, for example, inequalities in wealth and authority, are okay, they're just, only if they result in compensating benefits for everyone, and in particular, for the least advantaged member society. That's a fancy way of saying that we are okay with wealth inequality. We're okay with some people being really rich and some people being really poor, so long as the really rich, by being really rich, benefit the really poor. Think of, for instance, creating jobs or creating entertainment for the really poor, and of course, through taxes. And again, I want you to think about this. This sounds nice on paper, but would we really sort of agree on this if we were in the original position? You tell me. Here are your takeaway questions for Rawls. Again, the first one is, would we agree to these two principles? Rawls thinks that once we're in the original position, behind the veil of ignorance, we'll all agree on these two things, and that this would be, what he says, fair. This is justice as fairness. Does this seem fair to you? Would you agree with these two? Maybe not these two, maybe these two and more. Tell me about it. And secondly, does our society abide by these two principles? Does everyone in our society have equality of opportunity? And in our society, do the really, really rich benefit the really, really poor? Does them being really, really rich benefit the least well off? Well, you might want to consider who is the least well off. It's not working class people. It's probably people who are homeless or destitute. Do people like, for instance, Jeff Bezos being billionaires benefit homeless people? I'm not going to answer that for you. That's for you to answer. But that's Rawls. He loved the original position. He loves the veil of ignorance. Kind of a twist on social contract theory. Until next time, take it easy, folks.